I'm Kurt Kleinmann. I was the baby of the family, a family of 4 children, an older sister 11 years older, another sister 8 years older, and a brother 7 years older. So I was the baby of the family, always hovered over by his mother and father, who I thought my mother was beautiful, and did a lot of things growing up with her, as well as with my father.
I'm Jeremy Dronfield. I'm the author of The Boy Who Followed His Father into Auschwitz. Well, it first came to me when I was asked to get involved with trying to find a publisher for an English translation of Gustav Kleinmann's concentration camp diary. I felt that the issue with that was that the diary itself, as valuable as it is as a historical document, is very difficult to read. Gustav wrote it really for his own benefit rather than as a literary document or a record. So taking it together with various other pieces of evidence, including Fritz's, written memoir by Fritz and various interviews and other records, I thought that this was a story that really needed to be told. The best way I could serve it was to bring my talents as a writer to it and develop it as a full historical narrative, incorporating all the various sources, using the diary as a core and bringing in all research from various other sources. I had to track Kurt down. It was quite a difficult process because the family were fairly scattered, and I had first come into contact with the story through Professor Reinhold Gärtner of Innsbruck University, who had been a friend of Fritz Kleinmann, who had helped Fritz to get involved in publicising his experiences in the concentration camps. Reinhold had the email address of a member of the family, and she in turn put me in touch with Kurt, and I approached him. This would be about between 2 and 3 years ago. And we talked for hours on the phone. The huge amount of information and colour about Vienna before the war, in the period leading up to the Nazi occupation, and also about insights into the personalities of Gustav and Fritz that don't come across from the interviews or the memoir or the diary, and a portrait of an incredibly warm family life, and which kind of throws into sharp relief the tragedy of what happened to them.
Well, the first reaction was big surprise, of course. I knew that my brother was always interested in getting the book published in English, and I realized the difficulty they were having because it needed editing and it needed someone to do some work with it. So when I received the phone call, I mean, that was a delight. And of course, then when he asked me the questions, it sort of brought back a lot of memories that I haven't thought about for years. When I first read the draft, I knew obviously what happened to my mother, that she was murdered and so on, but I never knew how. And the first time when I read what Jeremy felt was the way it may have happened and so on, that was really a blow to me. That was the worst thing in my mind when I read the whole book and so on. My memories of Vienna as a child are outstanding and fantastic. I had a wonderful boyhood. We were kids. We lived across the street from a market. The market was our playground. Half of the market were fixed buildings and so on. But when they were finished with the market, the rest of the market was our playground. And we had a bunch of kids my age. My brother had a bunch of kids his age. And we had a wonderful life.
I felt that it was such a complex subject to tackle, and such an emotionally powerful subject. I've written a lot of books and quite a lot of true life stories, but I've never felt the degree of obligation and duty to serve a story as I have with this one. I've never felt so honoured, privileged and humbled to be allowed to write somebody's story, such a powerful and such an important story. And that was reflected in the work that I put into it. I felt a duty to chase down every loose end, every detail, to get everything absolutely spot on, everything right, every emotional aspect and every factual aspect. I wanted to get absolutely perfectly right. And it was an incredibly nervous moment for me when I sent Kurt my first completed draft for him to see, because you never know that you might have got things terribly wrong, misinterpreted things, and really upset someone. That was a very, very tense moment for me.
It was amazing, delightful, and of course I think the most amazing thing when I saw that he dedicated to me, I mean, that blew my mind.
It was a very hard book to write. I mean, as a writer, to some extent there's the technical challenges of piecing together a story sometimes kind of mediate between you and the story itself. It's like building something. You perhaps, while you're writing it, you perhaps don't feel it quite to the same extent that a person who is reading it. But there are moments when it really does get to you, and the most powerful for me, even though, well, there are two really powerful moments. Fritz's decision to follow his father into Auschwitz that's the core of the book. That's the core, the absolute emotional core. But the thing that the part of the story that really, and still does, move me was the fate of Kurt's mother and sister at Mali Trostinets. For me, it was an enormous challenge as a writer because we don't know exactly what happened to them beyond the point where they arrived. We only know two possibilities because nobody survived. There were no surviving witnesses. There were some quite complex technical challenges in writing that, but despite that, the emotion of it still really bothered me. I found it really emotionally hard to write. I had to get up quite frequently and walk around the room and recover before going back to it. And the thing that really hit me between the eyes and in the heart was the surviving letters from Kurt's mother to him that he provided me with. And I can scarcely even mention that now without feeling myself welling up. Writing it that part was a huge emotional challenge. Yeah.
I had 4 letters from my mother, I would say in June, July, and August when I first arrived in the United States. And the irony was, after a while, I lost my German and I had to have somebody translate them for me so I could remember them forever. And obviously the story, I knew that she was sent to Minsk and she was killed within 3 days, but I had no idea how. And then the irony was when I retired from my professional life and I became a consultant for the Joint Distribution Committee, one of the areas they sent me for consulting was Minsk. And I was able to go to Minsk with my wife and visit where we think the situation may have occurred. I had an adopted cousin that I asked for years, what was I like when I first arrived? You know, that sort of thing. My gut feeling was that the first few months, 3 to 4 months or so, may have been somewhat difficult. Number one, I didn't speak English. No one in the house spoke German. They spoke maybe a little bit of Yiddish. There were no friends or family friends and so on that spoke German. I have no idea how I communicated. The other thing that happened, though, is this was a very prominent family. Under normal circumstances, anyone would have waited till September to put me in school at the beginning of a school year. They put me in school in March, and I ended up for 2 weeks in the 2nd grade. Then they moved me up to the 3rd grade, and 4 weeks in the 4th grade. That sort of thing happened. And no one could speak to me, and if the teacher couldn't do anything with me, they gave me arithmetic to do. Well, so for the first 3 months, I'm sitting in a class with kids much younger than me and playing jumpy fiddle and so on, jumping over the stools and the chairs and playing with little kids, that sort of thing. But I must have survived. And then comes June, the family were the founders of a Jewish boys camp. So here I am, 11-year-old at a camp with boys, and I'm learning how to play baseball. So I'm having a wonderful time. And I have a feeling that playing with all the kids and so on, my mind was like any of the other little kids running around.
Well, initially, I had to think long and hard about how this book was going to be written. All I had to go on was Gustav's diary and a very short memoir written by Fritz. And between the two of them, they didn't really contain enough information to make a really coherent book. So I'm a novelist originally, and I did seriously consider for quite a long time that the best way to do justice to the story would be to fictionalize it. But then I researched it more deeply and managed to uncover more and more material, and it all began to take shape. And I realized that I've actually got more than enough material to make an entirely 100% factual account. So then there were a lot of quite difficult technical choices to make. The one thing that was always in my mind was to keep it simple and to just let the story and the characters and the emotions speak for themselves. I tend to be quite a descriptive writer, but I felt that I took taking writers like Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi as a kind of the ideal of Holocaust writing. I wanted to keep it clean, simple, straightforward. As I say, just let the facts speak for themselves. They don't need any emphasis or any elaboration. It's just there. It's enormously powerful.
What I've enjoyed was the flow of the story as Jeremy developed it, of how, for example, he'll talk about my brother doing something, and then all of a sudden my brother says, Kurt, follow me. And all of a sudden I appear in the story, and then he writes about me. And it's that flow, and then the same thing from the concentration camp to all of a sudden to a non-concentration camp of family history, or me getting lost in the park for some reason or other. And the way Jeremy flowed those stories together, it was a delight reading it. It was more emotional reading certain parts of what my brother, what happened to him under certain circumstances, the death of my mother and my sister, that sort of thing. That was more emotional, and just reading it, again, your tears swell up and that sort of thing. This picture was taken shortly after Hitler annexed Austria. So it must have been taken probably the summer of 1938. And all I know is my mother said, everybody get dressed. And I don't know where she got the sailor outfit for me. I can't remember it. And we went out and we had a picture taken. And it must have been her feeling that that could be the picture that might be of the family. That's the last time we might be all together.
No, all the interviews were actually over the phone and in writing. Today is actually the first time we've met in person. Yeah. Even though we've got to know each other so well over the years, it's our first meeting in person, and which for me is wonderful.
Yeah, and then eventually, I think I asked Jeremy, I said, can you give me a number of questions, besides talking on the phone and that sort of thing? And eventually he gave me a list of questions, and I tried to answer them. And then the question was, when I read the draft, was there anything that I saw that I needed to correct and so on? And actually there was very little. It may have been my aunts, the names or something like that. But there was very little correction that I needed to make.
Well, the things I really wanted to know, I wanted to be able to begin the story with the family in Vienna. So that was what I really wanted initially. That was the first big thing, was to create a really vivid impression of how the family lived together. A very close-knit family living in a very small apartment. And what Kurt told me was so warm and wonderful. It's really added to the story. It really underlined the dread and horror of what was done to the family, how they were torn apart. And the other part was Kurt's own story, because I felt it was really important to tell Kurt's story and his sister Edith, who escaped to England, because overall the story of the Kleinmann family is kind of a panorama of the whole Holocaust. All the different experiences that European Jews had during that period are represented pretty much in that one family. And I wanted the experience of the refugees to be part of the story, and how they were treated differently in America and in Britain. So that was a major thing that I needed from Kurt. So most of my questions were about that. I don't know whether you found it intrusive or invasive, or because I mean sometimes I think I probably pushed you quite hard for information, because I know that there are some parts that you find difficult to remember because of the trauma.
I think it was more the difficulty of trying to remember, and my question was almost, if you give me those questions, will something bring back my memory? I came out in 1941, in March of 1941, and when I came to the United States, I never heard of anyone, any children, I never met any other children until this woman did research and learned there were 1,200 children that came to the United States unaccompanied without their parents during a difficult time. And the irony was, I always thought that I may have been the last one to get out alive. And then it's through her story I learned that there were people some children came out even after I did.
Did you find really that you discovered new memories at all during this process? Did we unearth anything new that you had forgotten?
I think it brought back memories, because it made me think of the trip and that sort of thing. And it was interesting. I felt the memory that I had was pretty strong and very good. And I couldn't understand why one piece I have absolutely no memory, and within 24 hours memory starts. And I couldn't understand that. And I kept thinking that when I went to that reunion of all the children that we went to, and 35 of us gave talks, and I had to do a summary at the end, the person in charge who was responsible for recognizing and finding the story somehow asked me to summarize the talk at the end. So I started out by saying, I didn't know whether I would be sad. I didn't know if I would be angry. I didn't know if the emotion would bring back certain memories of mine. And I just felt I would have all these feelings. And I had all these feelings as I'm talking to them at the end of a 3-day event that was very, very, very emotional. But unfortunately, no matter any time that I talk about this, and I've given talks, after my mother says goodbye to me, I just cannot remember the next 24 hours. And I can't remember saying goodbye to I don't know why my sister did not say goodbye to me. I can't remember that. I don't remember whether she was in the apartment the day that I left. I just have no way of knowing that. But it was, you were never intrusive. I never felt, and I never had a problem with anybody asking me a question and me responding to it.
It worried me sometimes that I was...
Well, the other thing that it got me was the family that brought me up was such a prominent family. Anytime I did anything, I was in the newspaper. I mean, it's ridiculous. The first day I arrived, there's a picture of me in the newspaper. I remember I was interviewed on radio. I become a citizen, I'm in the newspaper. I get an award, I'm in the newspaper. you know, so the point I always made was, it's such a prominent family, I have to do whatever they expect of me, and I could never get into trouble because I couldn't do that to the family that brought me up.
Yeah, I say we've got to get to know each other so well over all the correspondence and conversations. But I mean, for me, it was like meeting a celebrity, because I've spent so much time trying to get inside Kurt's head and try to view the story from his point of view and recreate all that feeling, and writing about him, but taking the liberty of writing his story from his point of view. That for me, to meet somebody that you've done that for is really quite a powerful emotion.
Yeah. And it's crazy. He mentioned celebrity. All my friends, as I left, what it'll be like to speak to a celebrity when he comes home and that sort of thing. I don't have this feeling that I'm any kind of celebrity. I think I had a wonderful family. I was fortunate that 2 of us survived, and fortunate that my father and my brother were rescued and so on. And unfortunately, I lost my mother and my sister. But I never had the feeling that I was a celebrity and that sort of thing. I had a wonderful professional career, and I have done publishing quite a bit in the professional literature, but I've been rewarded for those things, but I've never really felt that I'm the celebrity just because I survived Hitler.